that we are also live streaming on Facebook, and that you are more than welcome to either leave your questions in the Facebook comment section of the live stream, as well as drop in your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom, or simply the chat box on Zoom as well. And we'll try our best to present your questions to our expert panelists today when the time comes later on in the second half of the program. Right, in just another 30 seconds or so, as more attendees are coming into the program. Thank you once again for being here with us at Global Human Rights and Election 44, where we plan to discuss foreign policy as well as human rights plans as it relates to the upcoming election on September the 20th. And Dr. Monia, as soon as you are good to go, I don't mind beginning. I'm not sure, Dr. Monia, if you can hear me, so I will send you a message. We're going to kind of commence now, if that's all right with everybody. So once again, good morning, and thank you so much for being here with us. Hello and peace be upon you, and welcome to a special Canadian program discussing global human rights, as I said, as it relates to the upcoming federal election. My name is Saliha, and I am quite honored today to moderate this segment that will present a few very unique voices, a few unique Canadian voices in the field of equality, peacekeeping, as well as security. And I do look forward to introducing our guests very soon. We first, of course, begin with a land acknowledgement. I happen to be in Milton, Ontario, so I do acknowledge that that Halton is rich in the history and modern traditions of Indigenous peoples. Halton is also on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and part of the Anishinaabe region that extends from the Niagara Peninsula across Hamilton, Halton, as well as Toronto to the Rouge River Valley. We do thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations for sharing their traditional territory with us. And we also, of course, recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. So a little bit about our program as we get started this morning. I just wanted to remind all of our wonderful viewers once again that you are more than welcome to leave any comments as well as questions in the chat section on Zoom, as well as in the comment section on Facebook. So just beginning with our program, unfortunately, the onslaught of crimes against humanity, including the rise of a modern genocide targeting both Indigenous, religious, as well as ethnic minorities, is a disturbing phenomenon that Canadians are becoming more wary of, especially as this upcoming election is underway and is a hot topic pretty much everywhere. It is undeniable that global human rights are one of the top issues that Canadians care about this federal election. Canada is also recognized as a major part of international law, and therefore we do need our leaders to work together to turn our commitments as a country into urgent human rights centered action. And today we hope to discuss that with our expert panelists. We'd love for you to contribute to our discussion today, and we do greatly look forward to receiving your comments and presenting them to the panelists later in the second half of the program. And right before I get to our opening statement, which our panelists will deliver, it is my honor to introduce our executive director of the organization, Taha Ghayur, who coincidentally did author a recent op-ed on the urgency of Islamophobia and human rights ahead of the elections. I'm going to quickly share this article in the chat, but really quickly, once again, Taha Ghayur is a long-time community service worker, as well as a human rights advocate and a writer, a public speaker, a youth leader, and a TV host based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, driven by a spirit of service and a desire to communicate creatively and effectively. Taha has been leading several different groundbreaking and impactful community initiatives as well as projects for over 20 years across North America. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, Brother Taha.
Well, thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Saliha, actually, for all your hard work behind the scenes in actually making this panel a reality, and as well as our wonderful team member, Sadia Masroor. I wanted to just take a moment to personally thank everyone for joining us this morning. It is a topic that may not be something that top of mind for many Canadians necessarily, but it is a topic that we truly believe, something that we all need to pay attention to a lot more, especially this coming election. As we know, and as we talked about, and as Saliha just referred to, the op-ed specifically that we published, we're talking about Canada's foreign policy that needs a radical shift, that requires a human rights lens. And what's really needed in this election, more than ever, after 20 years, 2 decades of wars, destruction, systemic discrimination, globally in particular, that target minorities, and happen to be, a lot of whom happen to be Muslim minorities, there is a need for an awakening and a recognition that our foreign policy is failing and is losing vision. And this global hate, Islamophobia and all forms of hate, is entrenched in state-sponsored policies, both globally as well as, unfortunately, in our own country. And both consecutive, the conservative and liberal governments are guilty of contributing to this ordeal that we are facing. Just yesterday, as I think every one of us was reflecting on the overwhelming feeling of, I don't even know if I can express the feelings of this, something that I think, let me take it back for a minute. One of the things that I was doing yesterday was I was trying not to express my feelings about what transpired since 9/11. And I'm still not trying to do that. But what I did do is I actually read, for my own therapy, comments, people's feelings about what they have gone through over the past 2 decades. Many of whom, like myself, were in university. Others were young professionals. And for many, either it was a turning point in a positive way, but it came through very difficult and painful process of being targeted, of being called out all sorts of names, of being physically even targeted at times. So this is something that, as something that we are all expressing, and especially yesterday, I was reflecting on it, and it's been quite a difficult night for me as I was reading some of people's experiences, and I'm still thinking about what some of these people have gone through, and some of which I had never heard before. Some of these stories have never been told to before. So we want to make sure that our government is now going forward held accountable for its stances or lack thereof when it comes to human rights issues. And this is why we are here, joined by some incredible, powerful human rights activists, leaders, people who have made an impact in Canada when it comes to a conversation around and discourse around human rights. So I'll leave it at that. Once again, thank you so much for sparing your day and time. And I'm sorry, I'm still trying to grasp from some words to express the feelings of what many of us are feeling for the past, especially a few days, in particular yesterday. Thank you so much once again. Appreciate your time and look forward to hearing some very insightful conversation. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, it is quite a pleasure of mine to introduce our speakers. I'm going to introduce the panelists one by one, and then we'll jump into our first question, beginning, of course, with Alex Neve, who is presently an adjunct professor in international human rights law at the University of Ottawa and Dalhousie University, as well as a senior fellow with the University of Ottawa's Graduate School and Public and International Affairs. He has happened to serve as Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada's English branch from 2000 all the way up to 2020, incredibly. In that role, he has led as well as taken part in over 40 human rights research and advocacy delegations throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, Guantanamo Bay, and closer to home, the First Nations communities across the country. Alex, thank you so much for your presence here today. Wonderful. So next we have with us Mr. Farid Khan. Farid is, of course, the founder of the very renowned anti-racism activist group called Canadians United Against Hate. He is also the Director of Advocacy and Media Relations, as well as the co-founder of another quite prominent human rights organization called the Rohingya Human Rights Network. Farid is also he carries a professional background in strategic communications, government relations, and advocacy, as well as public policy development and media relations spanning around 30 years. During his career, he's advocated for the advancement of public policy initiatives at all levels of government. He's advised and consulted with federal and provincial cabinet ministers, senators, municipal business, and community leaders on a broad spectrum of public policy and communication issues that have impacted the lives of Canadians as well as minorities around the world. Mr. Farid, thank you so much for your time this morning as well. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're so honored and excited to have with us Dr. Monia Mazigh, who is an author in her own right, as well as an academic and a human rights activist. She does have a memoir called Hope and Despair, which happens to narrate the ordeal that was lived by her husband when he was detained by both American and Syrian authorities. She's written a number of novels, such as Mirrors and Mirages, which was shortlisted for the City of Ottawa Book Award, as well as the Trillium Book Award. She then published Hope Has Two Daughters, and her most recent novel is called Farida, which was published last year by the publisher David Editions. Dr. Monia is joining us with a little bit of technical difficulties because of networking issues, but I wanted to thank you to the program, Dr. Monia. I do appreciate you being here with us despite the difficulties. Okay, wonderful. So just beginning with our first question. So it's the same question going out to all of our panelists today, and we hope that they will kind of dedicate their opening statement to addressing this issue that we begin with, which is, why should foreign policy matter in Canadian elections? And do the thoughts of candidates and their plans on foreign policy, would that happen to matter to Canadian voters in terms of translating to hopefully getting them to vote, especially in the wake of bilateral relations with key countries like China and India? I will copy this question into the chat. I know it's a little bit long, but if you could touch on that in your opening statement. And we begin first with Mr. Alex.
Well, thank you very much, Saleha, and salam alaikum, dear friends and colleagues. And Saleha began with her own land acknowledgement, and I too would like to begin by noting that I'm joining from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people here in Ottawa, and very much highlight what a sacred honor it is to be involved in discussions about human rights from this territory. And thank you very much to the Justice for All team for pulling together this really important opportunity for the conversation, and always a delight to connect with two dear friends and colleagues, Farid and Monia, who I always enjoy. We all three of us have, I don't know if ever the three of us together, but certainly we've been in these sorts of spaces many times together over the years, and it's always an honor. So first, let me state the obvious, I guess, in response to the question framed, and that is that when we talk about foreign policy, I think we would all agree that we're talking about human rights-based foreign policy. Because not only should foreign policy matter, I'm assuming all three of us are going to say it does, and that it certainly should matter in times of elections, but in particular, it's human rights-based foreign policy that matters, and that is generally not what we get. There are some moments, obviously, going back years and decades, when Canadian foreign policy has had a human rights moment, but I think at best, we would probably describe that as being inconsistent and uneven. And at worst, human rights is far too often deliberately sidelined and ignored in foreign policy. And I expect that, in my response to the various questions, this idea of what a human rights-based approach to foreign policy entails is something that I'll continue to tease out. So I think there's three pieces wrapped up in this question. Why should foreign policy matter? Do Canadians care about foreign policy when they vote? And then what about specific bilateral foreign policy matters? China and India have been highlighted. I think I've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to make 4 points. The first is quite an obvious and broad one, but I think it's an important starting point. Foreign policy matters because Canada is part of the world. Canadians ourselves come from so many corners of the world. Canadians, regardless of where they come from, I think increasingly do care deeply about events in other countries, and even more so when they do have close family, community, or other ties. Certainly Canadians increasingly do business in all corners of the world, and that's not always a good thing. Doing business includes selling arms to Saudi Arabia, for instance. Canadians work abroad. They travel abroad in numbers like never before. Certainly our refugee and immigration policies, integral to the Canadian identity, are wholly intertwined with global trends and crises and very much buffeted by foreign policy. So do we really still live in a time when divvying up domestic issues over here and international issues over there makes any sense, and even whether it really still has any resonance? If there was a time when foreign policy could be thought of as something detached from what's happening here in Canada, then I think those days are long gone. And that when we let it drift and when we fail to ensure that we have informed national debates about not only the country we seek and desire, but the world we seek and desire, and Canada's place in that world, and which parties champion what policies to best take us in that direction, then we've missed a profoundly important opportunity. And I guess I'd just note that we have such a painful and disgraceful reminder right now with the spiraling crisis in Afghanistan over the past month. This is, I went back to check it out, this is the 7th federal election since the war in Afghanistan began in 2001. And I'm not going to say that it never came up in any of those elections, but the extent to which it ever did was really only in polarizing and limited terms. I think back to the 2011 election when there was some focus on Stephen Harper's government's handling of the issue of battlefield transfer of prisoners by the Canadian military, for instance. But just imagine that, 7 elections, the most consequential Canadian military operation since the Korean War, a war and political events that were shaping global agendas, major amounts of Canadian development assistance, a growing Afghan diaspora community. And did any of those elections truly display vision and policy the parties felt should guide our overall engagement in Afghanistan? They didn't. And here we are in 2021, Afghanistan is coming up. How could it not? But again, not with a sense of vision and policy. It's really only as some parties try to score political points, criticizing the Trudeau government for how evacuations have been handled. So foreign policy matters because we are part of this intertwined, interconnected world. Secondly, though, it matters because when we ignore it, the perils are extreme. And it's a bit of the same theme here, that we can't disentangle what is foreign from what is domestic. But we also can't ignore the fact that those foreign policy considerations have direct implication for us here domestically. Right alongside the climate crisis, for instance, could there be a more glaring example of an issue that has brought down borders, and made it clear how connected and intertwined our world is than COVID. Yet here we are. Are we hearing debate about COVID from a foreign policy or international perspective at all in this election? Do we have some really solid indications that governments clearly understand that if, as we have been, if we fail to tackle COVID globally through diplomacy, treaties, international development assistance, international trade policy, then really we're failing to tackle COVID anywhere, really. And also, as Taha has reminded us, we just marked the 20th anniversary of 9/11 yesterday. Right away, a host of issues, many of which have been very pressing concerns for individuals and communities across Canada come rushing to mind. Terrorism, counterterrorism, Islamophobia, restricting freedoms in the name of security, fighting wars in the name of security, mass surveillance, privacy, digital freedom. Are they domestic? Yes. Are they international? Yes. But we're hearing very little about any of that, including, regrettably, Islamophobia, just little more than 3 months since the horrific attack and killings of the Afsal family in London, Ontario. An issue that so clearly transcends domestic and foreign policy considerations, but absent. Third, do voters care? Do they pay attention? I think the prevailing wisdom here is that they do not. You hear that all the time. Elections aren't fought on the basis of foreign policy because elections aren't won on the basis of foreign policy. And I think even within the advocacy community, regrettably, we've come to kind of assume that's the case. But is it as true as we think, or kind of what's behind that? Well, I think certainly, obviously not in our circles. Obviously in our circles, these issues care, the people close to us do care deeply. What is the party's stance on Israel, Palestine, on arms sales to Saudi Arabia, on getting Canadians out of jail in China, and on and on. But I think what I would highlight here is I think we also need to think about it from a slightly different angle. If it is true that so-called foreign policy issues don't register as key concerns, doesn't much of that come down to what the parties are putting in front of the voters? In other words, it's the old chicken and egg here, which comes first. I did a quick review of the 5-party platforms, and it is dismal to see how buried foreign policy is in all of those platforms. With the Liberal platform, which has 8 headings, none of which are about foreign policy. You only find foreign policy as subheading number 3 in the 7th theme. The Conservative platform, famous for its detail, it isn't until you get to the 12th chapter of 23 chapters, so just over halfway through, that you get to something called a detailed plan to promote Canada's interests and values. And the same absolutely goes for the other 3, the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc. So I think you get my point here. You get what you ask for. When leaders, when parties aren't boldly putting this out in front of voters, convincing voters that this matters and is something they should engage with, then it isn't surprising that it isn't featuring as prominently as it should. Lastly, very quickly, the point about bilateral relations, China and India being highlighted in particular. And notably in those very limited foreign policy sections in the platforms, there's only a handful of countries that come up by name at all, the most extensive being the Conservative platform, which has paragraphs actually on China, India, Iran, Israel, Palestine, and Ukraine. And that can be helpful. I'm not denying at all that we certainly do want to hear what the parties have to say about particular country situations. But what I always worry about here is that the countries that get attention are the ones that are already getting attention. They're the ones that are in the headlines. They're probably only being included in the platforms because the parties think there's some diaspora political points to be gained here. I'm struck, for instance, by the fact that, as far as I can tell, none of the parties' platforms refer at all to Haiti, arguably the most compelling foreign policy concern in our hemisphere, and certainly directly relevant to many Haitian Canadians. So yes, country by country details are useful, but what I really want to see is backing up from that, the overarching framework, the convincing, solid, comprehensive commitments that lay out how human rights will be at the heart of that party's approach to foreign policy. I'll end there.
Much appreciated, Alex, for your nuanced answer there. Moving on to Farid Khan. Mr. Farid, why is human rights foreign policy important in the upcoming federal elections and to Canadian voters? Please go ahead.
Sorry, I guess I have to unmute myself before I can speak. First of all, I'd like to thank Justice for All for hosting this panel. I feel very honored to be with two very distinguished panelists and two human rights giants in Canada. It's nice to see both Alex and Monia again. And Alex, yes, I think the last time we shared a platform together, it may have been actually in September of 2017 when we spoke on Parliament Hill about the breaking Rohingya crisis, which came to the world's attention. I'd also like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to everyone from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people in the National Capital Region of Canada. And this discussion couldn't come at a more opportune time. We're a week away from voting when people are thinking about making their voting decision. And with respect to the specific question of the opening remarks, should foreign policy matter in Canadian elections? Yes, it should. And Alex, you were very correct. I think all three of us, when we think of foreign policy, we think of it from a human rights perspective. But when foreign policy generally is discussed in elections, it doesn't tend to be discussed from a human rights perspective. Unfortunately, promises about upholding international human rights during elections don't move the needle for a majority of voters and won't shift many votes, sadly, which is why it generally isn't among the top 5 priorities for political leaders to discuss on the campaign trail. Only when foreign policy directly impacts voters or a major constituency in the country in any manner does it become a deciding factor in voting intention. In my experience, over 40 years of voting, there have been only 2 examples where I think that foreign policy has likely been a deciding factor in an election. The first one, I think, was 1988, which was the election about free trade with the US, and would have required significant changes to foreign policy with respect to trade with the US. And I think the second was in 2015, when the Syrian refugee crisis was top of mind of Canadian voters and likely shifted votes to the Liberals under Justin Trudeau, given the frankly very sad and very disappointing approach that the Harper government took to the Syrian refugee crisis. But generally, it seems job creation and employment consistently rate high for many voters when it comes to foreign policy, and more so for those whose jobs depend on Canadian exports to the US or anywhere else in the world. Even during the height of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the US had nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, foreign policy didn't generally tend to be a top 5 issue for voters, other than for the examples I've mentioned, which don't have anything to do, obviously, with superpower conflict. The only voting constituency where it seems that foreign policy is consistently a high priority is among Jewish Canadians and Zionists, where support for Israel by political parties is the support of their votes. And as we have seen over the years, that community has been very, very effective in its lobbying of the parties to make sure that their foreign policy interests are represented in campaign party platforms. Generally, however, it seems that voters are moved more by issues like healthcare and bread and butter issues than foreign policy when they're thinking about who to vote for. The other part of the question which was sent to us was, do candidate thoughts on foreign policy really matter? And specifically referring to the bilateral relations with key countries like China and India. It's interesting that you did mention China and India, because of course the relationships that with respect to foreign policy that we have with those 2 countries are once again very rooted in jobs and trade and not necessarily human rights. And when human rights is mentioned with respect to those 2 countries, it's mentioned as an aside. Now, in this election, China has been mentioned because, of course, issues around the 2 Michaels being detained by China have become an election issue with the Liberals talking about the efforts they've made to try and bring these two Canadians home, and the Conservatives and NDP hammering the Liberals on basically their ineffectiveness in really pushing the needle on that issue. Unfortunately, that issue with respect to foreign policy and human rights is very much tied up with what the US is going to do, because of course, the detainment of these two Canadians was instigated by Canada serving or acting on a request from the United States about detaining the Huawei executive who was in China, or who was in Canada at the time, and is right now fighting extradition proceedings in the Canadian courts. But let's look at what the Liberal, Conservative, and NDP platforms actually say about this. And I'm quoting now from the platforms themselves. The Liberals' position on foreign policy is basically encompassed by this statement. Rising authoritarianism and the reemergence of great power competition is undermining international peace and security, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. Now more than ever, Canadians understand that building a safer and more stable world requires investments in our strength at home and active engagement with our partners abroad. With foreign threats and interference on the rise and the impact of authoritarian trends more widespread more than ever, it is time to place the promotion of democracy, human rights, and rule of law at the center of foreign policy. And that statement is in page 43 of the Liberal platform. The Conservatives have the following in their policy document. Canada's foreign policy is more important now than it has ever been in a generation. How our national leaders advance and defend the interests and values of Canada is no longer something we can ignore or take for granted. Canada's Conservatives will adopt a foreign policy that seeks new and strengthened alliances with democratic allies and economic partners who share our values. We will face down the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party, standing with the Chinese people and promoting greater freedom for them. We'll be aggressive champions for human rights, dignity, and transparency. And that appears on page 16 of their policy document. And for the NDP, they say the following. Canadians are proud of our role in the world, and they want a government that will make the right choices to help people, but under Conservative and Liberal governments, decades of cynical politicking and cuts have meant that Canada is often on the wrong side of important global issues. New Democrats believe that Canadian interests are best served by a strong and principled foreign policy based on human rights, multilateralism, and the best interests of global peace and security. A New Democrat government will stand up to China with a strong and coherent strategy to defend Canadian interests at home and abroad. We will work with our allies to lead a robust and coordinated international response to China's disregard of the rule of law. Now that appears on page 35. It's interesting to note that both the NDP and the Conservatives specifically mention China. India, of course, in scanning the three documents, is not mentioned specifically. I'm sorry, I should say that the Liberals mentioned China at one point in their document and India not at all. The Conservatives mentioned China 31 times and India 9 times. The NDP mentions China 4 times and India not at all. And it's interesting to note, of course, that a lot of the references to these two nations and foreign policy is centered around trade. I think that we'll get into it obviously in the Q&A, but that essentially is my take on the issue of foreign policy. I think it's an important issue to discuss during elections, but unfortunately, I don't think that foreign policy is a huge factor in voting intentions among Canadians. So I think while the three party leaders will continue to mention certain foreign policy issues, I don't know that that's going to have an impact beyond a small minority of communities within the Canadian voting public. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No, thank you. I do appreciate the extensive background that you shared there. And we move on to Dr. Monia. Just if you could touch upon the significance of human rights foreign policy in the upcoming federal election, as well as to Canadian voters as well.
Thank you, Saliha, and thank you to Justice for All Canada for organizing this panel. I'm also grateful to have both very good friends, Alex, Neve, and Farid, to be also a part of sharing their views and opinion. As my two other colleagues, I am also talking to you here from Ottawa, the national capital, but also the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, nation. It is very actually important. I'm glad that Justice for All Canada organized this event about foreign policy, because as both Farid and Alex mentioned previously, we didn't see, I wouldn't say at all, but very rare were the occasion where foreign policy was evoked by the leader of the major party here in Canada. And it is unfortunately that it gives the impression that the foreign policy is something far away, something that does not interest Canadian, which is of course not the case. And this election is also not an exception. Foreign policy remains one of the most forgotten topics among the ones that are crucial to understand and assess Canadian politics, and for voters to make an enlightened decision. But yet foreign policy receives very, very little attention and remains dismissed and frankly sometimes purposely ignored. I would give some reasons why it is that the case. I mean, those are my personal kind of humble sort of reflection about the situation. There are very few Canadian journalists who are knowledgeable about foreign questions, and the number of foreign correspondents has been cut throughout the years from the national broadcaster. That doesn't mean that there are not journalists invested into the matters, but there are less and less who are experts in those matters. So that makes the rest of the journalists a little bit insecure, and they don't want to ask questions about situation that they are not familiar with. When foreign questions are raised, they are most of the time related to the bilateral relations with principally the American neighbors, but emerging powers around the world, like in Asia, South America, Africa, those relationships remained ignored. And as both Farid and Alex mentioned, if they are tackled, they are going to be based mainly tackled from a trade perspective and not necessarily from any other sort of policy, and specifically any sort of human right or other sort of angles. Many Canadians also are made to believe by some politicians and journalists that what really matters in the elections are questions like jobs, healthcare, and more recently, they are including environment. But these are indeed, I mean, yes, of course, these are indeed very important issues, but they cannot fully understood if we don't have a global perspective of the world. For example, to go back to the question of selling arms to Saudi Arabia, for example, it looks like a mainly or an exclusively foreign political matter. However, in reality, it is an economical, domestic, financial, and human rights issue. During Stephen Harper government, the refusal of the government to cancel the Saudi Arabia light armed vehicles deal was justified at that time by the loss of Canadian jobs. So at General Dynamics. So we can see here how what is supposed to be only foreign policy have also some sort of impact on our own decision when it comes to either healthcare or jobs or other issues. During Justin Trudeau government in 2010, the reason of not canceling the same deal was evoked as the potential financial penalty that would be paid by the Canadian government if such a deal comes to be cancelled. So once again here, we can see that there are really, like, obviously many angles to political decision, but most of the time the foreign affairs angle is going to be dismissed and is only going to be not explained or not included into the overall discussion during debates or during conversation with Canadian. And of course, hiding behind the irrelevancy of foreign policies is not really a reason. Actually, I found it as a very pathetic excuse to not allow voters to understand the complexity of political decisions. I would like to bring two examples of how foreign policy during this election should have been key, but still were not included. Of course, the fall of Kabul after the American forces left Afghanistan. Canada participated in this war for 2 decades, from 2001 until today. I mean, of course, in terms of the soldier and in terms of the military, it was until 2014, but we had a Canadian presence up to now. 158 Canadian soldiers were killed. $20 billion have been spent on that war. Internationally, this war shaped Canada foreign policy. Domestically, the same war affected the lives of Canadians, of the veterans, of their families. It affected funding decisions in the budget. It affected the reputation of Canada when it was handling the Afghan refugee prisoners when they were arrested. And so it has really many angles. However, the question of accountability around that decision to go to war was not raised at all during this last this election, and that would leave the politician and journalists literally out of the hook. I mean, the only question that was raised was about the evacuation of the Canadian who were there. Not to say that this was not important, but I think it kind of made the main issue of going there, of fighting, of not finding any peaceful way to get out of Afghanistan, really the main topic of the question, but leaving it on the surface. The evacuation of the American forces from Afghanistan and the forceful return of the Taliban also leaves a vacuum in the region that will be eventually filled by China and India, those two powers that are really changing the geostrategical forces in the region, who have already indicated that they are accepting to collaborate and work with the Taliban government. And this will leave also Canada and the US somehow isolated, or at least not in the loop, whereas, you know, they have been there for a decade. So this is another question that should have been discussed, but it is not at all being talked about. And of course, the other example, both of my also colleague mentioned it, it's the case of the two Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and how Canada accepted under the Trump administration, under the Trump administration pressure. So it was somehow a bilateral, somehow mutual decision to arrest the Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. However, later on, Canada found itself being a center of retaliation with the arrest of two of its own citizens in Chinese prison. And we can see here how foreign policy is tied to internal affairs. So it's not mainly just a domestic affair, but very global, and how they are not discussed during the campaign, or if they do, it is only a very polarized matter between the conservative asking a very sort of a strong punishment, coercive sort of coercive sort of reaction, and the liberal still talking about so I think I will stop here. I don't want to also not mention the case of course, Hussein Salil, the Canadian from Uighur descent, who have been arrested also in China since 2007, accused and charged for terrorism. And then his life sentence was reduced to 20 years. Once again, we hear nothing about this case. So the two other Michael took somehow the first place into, unfortunately, this sad situation. But once again, we don't really talk about the other cases, like I mentioned, like Hussein Salil and other Canadian citizens who are detained abroad. And so it is not only a matter, I think what we should remind our fellow Canadian, that talking about foreign policy, it is not only a matter of talking about trade or talking with our relationship with the US. If I remember correctly, in the last debate, when Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, was asked about somehow international impact of Canada, he mentioned the foreign aid. So I think, yes, it is important, but it's still very, very little compared to all the other topics, like we mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Palestine, the Kashmir situation, Haiti, for instance, like Alex mentioned. All these countries, despite the huge trade bilateral relationship with the US and with China and India, I think at the heart remains the foreign policy matters, and specifically human rights, justice, defense of rights of individuals. So I think it is a missed opportunity, and I'm glad that we are here to talk about it today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monia, and I hope that we can get into the multiple points that you had raised. We do enter the second portion of our program, where we have directed questions to all of our expert panelists today. And we're going to go in the same order that we began with, starting with Alex, Fareed, and then once again, Dr. Monia. So let's get into the topic of China, of course, very popular in the election debates that we've been watching the past couple of days. So Alex, most party leaders have expressed their desire to impose Magnitsky-like sanctions against the Chinese Communist government, except the Liberal Party, of course. Rather, the Liberals have been a major obstacle in sanctioning China, whereas parties like the NDPs, as well as the Conservatives, do want to explore relationships with Indo-Pacific as well as African regions in an effort to perhaps reduce those trade priorities with China. But when it comes to addressing such crimes against humanity through diplomatic measures, and keeping in mind that we're dealing with one of the major economic powers of the world, China, it's not necessarily like the Rwanda situation in the past. In your professional opinion, what is the more effective approach, and will a combination of sanctions as well as trade restrictions be more effective to counter the ongoing genocide in East Turkestan or Xinjiang? Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks very much. And obviously an incredibly important question, especially with the focus on the genocide against the Uyghurs, which, as you've noted, brings us into that very challenging realm of how to address China's abysmal human rights record. And I think it's interesting that the main point of the question is to really grapple with this debate that's often out there as to whether soft diplomacy or hard-edged sanctioning are the more effective strategies in these kinds of situations. So I'll certainly address it with China and the Uyghur genocide in particular in mind, but also maybe from a bit of a wider perspective as well, because this question comes up all the time. all the time in human rights advocacy. Is it better to go soft or hard, be conciliatory or condemnatory, criticize publicly, or raise issues privately? And I think there's assumptions in the background of that. Isn't going soft really an excuse or a pretext for essentially really doing nothing, especially if there are competing interests around trade and investment? Isn't it all about giving a bit of an appearance of something with nothing really going on? On the other hand, some say isn't going hard often really a lot of bluster, standing on a soapbox, but at the end of the day, making no real difference and perhaps aggravating the country in question such that channels for diplomacy get shut down. Well, the answer is, and I'll come to China in particular in a minute, it can never be one or the other. And we really do great disservice to the serious human rights concerns at stake, including in this instance, concerns of the very highest order, genocide, when we frame human rights advocacy and strategies about being a choice between the two. We certainly often hear from Canadian governments that soft approaches, being more conciliatory, quiet discussions, diplomatic channels is the way to go. And yes, I think it's fair to have the Liberal government in the spotlight right now with respect to China. And I've got a lot of critique as to how they've handled that file. I think I would broaden that out to say what we generally see is that whoever's in government is the one who has this inclination to go soft, and opposition parties tend to be the one pressing otherwise. We saw exactly the same challenges around China, especially in the latter part of the Harper government. So there's a kind of a bit of a trend there. And we can all understand why that is, because when they go soft, it's a lot easier for them. There's less conflict, there's less controversy, there's less scrutiny of their efforts, there's less media attention, fewer questions. Some commentators, we hear the opposite, that diplomacy is meaningless and nothing but smoke and mirrors, and that the Canadian government should just go the route of break off diplomatic relations, issue public statements, and denounce and condemn. Now, I don't want to suggest that Canada never pursues tougher measures. They certainly do. There's a growing number of individuals and countries that have been sanctioned under our so-called Magnitsky Act, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Officials Act, and the Special Economic Measures Act. And that includes 4 individuals and 1 state entity now sanctioned with respect to the Uighur crisis. Canadian government, of course, doesn't use the language of genocide. But there is generally a sense, even in those instances, that politics take precedence over clear human rights principles. When you look at the countries that are sanctioned, it's without exception, generally, countries with which Canada has strained relations already. So there's very little cost to pointing the finger. Countries with whom Canada has closer ties, where there's strong and competing economic interests, more likely to escape censure. Look here in the Americas. There's a number of Venezuelan officials associated with the Maduro government and Nicaraguan officials associated with the Ortega government who have very rightly been sanctioned. However, individuals in Honduras, in Guatemala, in Colombia, just to name 3 of the most obvious, responsible for very serious and similar human rights violations, but where there's political alignment with Canada, not so much. So let's consider what Canada's approach in particular should be to addressing the Uyghur genocide and China's deeply concerning human rights record more widely. The first point I would highlight is it is beyond frustrating that for many, many years, as China's human rights record has deteriorated precipitously, the calls that have been made by civil society groups, and I know because for most of those 20 years, I was chairing a civil society coalition focused on human rights in China. And our coalition's calls for Canada to develop a meaningful, concrete, comprehensive, whole of government human rights policy for our relationship with China. that applies to our trade dealings, that applies to our immigration stream, that applies to cultural exchanges, that applies to every single aspect of our very comprehensive and wide-ranging relationship with China, were never taken up by either party, no matter who was in power. And instead, human rights considerations were generally always relegated to the desk of one officer in our embassy in Beijing, one or two officers at international affairs back here in Ottawa, and that overarching need to have something concrete with benchmarks and clear strategies never developed. That's a big failure. The second, we have tried, but really haven't invested what needs to be invested into really crafting a multilateral approach to China. China's been very good at keeping countries divided. They deal with countries one-on-one, and countries have fallen for that, largely because they want to keep their own trade relationship strong. So they have agreed to have quiet behind the doors discussions about human rights rather than pursue things openly and multilaterally. That has to change. There has to be a concerted effort, and not just bringing together the usual suspects. You can usually get the United States, the EU, Australia, sometimes Japan, to sign on to a growing number of public declarations that states are making about human rights concerns in China. We've got to move beyond that. There really needs to be a full-out effort to craft a strong multilateral initiative. Number three, we do need to start calling it what it is. And with respect to the Uyghur situation, at a minimum, we are talking about extensive, unrelenting crimes against humanity. I and many others, organizations, researchers, and legal academics much more expert than I, have all concluded that it does amount to genocide. Canada shies away from using either of those terms whenever we call out what's happening on the ground in China, and that has to change. Number four, absolutely, this reluctance to be hard-edged with China has to give way. We do need more sanctions and penalties against individuals who are responsible for this, but more trade sanctions and really digging into supply chains, boycotts on goods coming out of forced labor situations in the Uyghur regions, for instance. All of that has to absolutely be on the table. And this, I go back to the multilateral piece as well, not just on our own, but very much in concert with other countries, but not waiting for other countries to do it first and then we'll follow. We've got to be leader in this space. And then the last thing there's more I could say, but the last thing I really want to say is here the need for consistency. We have seen unprecedented levels of Canadian diplomacy on behalf of the two Michaels. And that is so crucial. Obviously, those cases are very concerning, but there are so many other completely overlooked and forgotten prisoners. Monia has reminded us of the case of Hussein Chilil. I've been involved in the advocacy on his case since 2006, and it is painful to see the degree to which that advocacy on behalf of the Canadian government has not remotely ever reached the same level of what we're seeing on behalf of the two Michaels. Sun Qian, a Falun Gong practitioner, she's been in prison since 2017. We hardly ever hear a word from the Canadian government about her case. And there's 4 Canadians on death row in China, 4 Canadians who are facing the possibility of execution. So consistency has to be the hallmark of our approach to China. I'll wrap it up there.
Much appreciated. And we do feel like each of these topics deserves a conference around them, as these are quite important and critical subjects in international humanitarian law. I want to move on from China to India with our next speaker. And just a quick reminder that we do have a few wonderful user submitted questions that we'd love the time to get to. So just a friendly reminder to our respected speakers, around 5 minutes per question, if that's all right. So with Mr. Farid, as you know, political parties such as the NDP, the Greens, as well as the Bloc Québécois have each criticized India's citizenship laws, and they've each also pledged their platform to lead diplomatic efforts in promoting the Indian government's compliance with international human rights laws. India's discriminatory policies target people based on religious and ethnic identity, which is of course very reminiscent to Quebec's Bill 21. So Mr. Farid, you could definitely see the hypocrisy there. So the question here is, if you could please help us reflect on the similarities between Bill 21 and the discriminatory citizenship laws in India, both of which reduce people's access to job opportunities and equal access to programs and services. And if federal leaders are so quick to criticize India for these discriminatory laws, why is there such a reluctance to touch upon Bill 21 in the elections? Please go ahead.
Thank you for that question, Saleha. Of course, we've seen much about Bill 21, and I think most, if not all, viewers are probably well aware of Quebec's Bill 21 and what it's doing in Canada. So I will explain a little bit about India's Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, for those who may not be familiar with it. In December 2019, Narendra Modi's government, which has displayed extreme hostility towards Indo-Muslims since first being elected, passed the CAA. The legislation is intended to provide Indian citizenship to Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, and Christian migrants or refugees from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, 3 Muslim majority countries, who entered India before December of 2014. However, Muslims are included under this law and face risks of statelessness, disenfranchisement, detention, and deportation. This religion test violates the secular nature of the Indian Constitution and eliminates equality between Indian citizens and violates, frankly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which India is a state party. In addition, the law targets those arbitrarily declared as foreigners via a discriminatory bureaucratic process. In particular, it directly impacts 1.9 million persons of Bengali origin, the vast majority of whom are Muslim, who are excluded from the National Register of Citizens in the state of Assam. Many of them have roots in India going back generations, but they may not have the official documents to prove their claims to citizenship, and therefore are put at risk under this law. Critics say that the CAA bill is part of Modi's agenda to marginalize Muslims and to undo the secular nature of the Indian government. This law has been condemned by the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner as being discriminatory, as well as by obviously Muslim groups and human rights groups in India. It's interesting to note that the NDP, Green, and Bloc, while they made major statements on the CAA condemning this law as discriminatory, the Trudeau government has remained completely silent on the issue, despite public demonstrations that have taken place in various Canadian communities, calling on the government to condemn the law. Of course, the main reason for this is that there are 1.5 million Indo-Canadians in this country, the vast majority being Hindu, and many who are supportive of the Modi government. And of course, the vast majority of these Indo-Canadians who are able to vote support the Liberals. The Conservatives have remained silent on the CAA because they hope that they can increase their support within that community. Now, Quebec's Bill 21 secularism law was passed in June 2019, and it was the culmination of more than a decade of efforts by, frankly, the white Francophone Quebecois community to limit the religious rights of Quebec Muslims. The first salvo in this battle in Quebec was fired during the reasonable accommodation debates in the late 2000s under then Liberal Premier Jean Charest. The next attempt to address the issue of reasonable accommodation and focusing specifically on the Muslim community was the attempt by the Parti Québécois government with their Charter of Values. Then when they got defeated and we had another Liberal government elected, that government put in place, I believe the bill was Bill 62, and it was called the niqab ban legislation by the Liberal government, and it was challenged constitutionally. Now, all the efforts of up to that point, if they had gone through the courts and reached the Supreme Court, would have been deemed unconstitutional because the efforts specifically targeted Quebec Muslims. However, when the CAQ got elected under Francois Legault, they took another approach. They decided to target all religious minority communities in Quebec, and they justified it under Bill 21 with the claim that it was to protect Quebec's secular society. And frankly, they didn't really care about the collateral damage to minority religious communities other than Muslims. Now, the issue of secularism, I think we all generally understand it, but at its core, secularism says that government shall not designate a state religion or favor one religion over another. So unlike, for example, the government of Saudi Arabia or Iran, which are openly declared as Islamic governments, we do not have any governments in Canada, either provincially or federal, at the federal level, that say that they are a Christian government. And that is essentially what secularism is about. But what Quebec has done is they have wrapped secularism in the language of, I would say, radical atheism. The intent of the Bill 21 law is to target Muslims, and I don't think that there would be a lot of disagreement with that statement. But the collateral damage, of course, affects Jews, Sikhs, and other minority faith communities. And prior to the passage of the law in June of 2019, there was a poll done in Quebec, and there's an article about it from that time in the Montreal Gazette, which says that public support among the largely Francophone population of Quebec was driven by their animosity towards Muslims. So I think when you have people like Yves-François Blanchet and François Legault saying that Quebecers are not racist, no, not all Quebecers are racist, but certainly a significant portion of Quebecers, and particularly Francophone Quebecers, are racist when it comes to Quebec Muslims. And if Mr. Blanchet, he made this big show after the English language debate, when he was asked a question about Bill 21, he made a big show in the post-debate scrum saying that the moderator had called him a xenophobe and a racist. Now, she used no such words in the question that she put to Mr. Legault. However, if he was sitting in front of me, I would say to him, Mr. Legault, if you don't want to be labeled as a xenophobe and a racist, then don't support xenophobic and racist legislation. And that's basically it. Both the Indian law and Quebec's law are, in my view, deeply rooted in Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. Obviously, anti-Muslim sentiment has been around in India for decades, but it is a relatively new phenomenon in Quebec. However, the end result of both is the same: legalized discrimination against Muslims. And of course, in Quebec, that includes observant Muslims, observant Jews, observant Sikhs. Now, while some Canadian party leaders have been willing to speak out on the CAA in India, they have all chosen to do nothing or say nothing about Bill 21 because of the fear of losing voter support among Francophone Quebecers. Aaron O'Toole has basically said he will respect Quebec's right to do what it does in its own house. Sadly, Jagmeet Singh, as the only other major party leader who is racialized, has also said the same. And Justin Trudeau, when he was campaigning the 2019 election, said he would be willing to consider government action. But of course, after the election in 2019, we heard nothing more. And essentially, I think that all three major party leaders are guilty of throwing human rights under the bus in Quebec. Both the Indian law and the Quebec law deny rights, and the primary targets of the rights being denied are Muslims. Both laws are unconstitutional in their respective jurisdictions. In Canada, Muslim Quebecers, mainly women who wear the hijab, have had their lives disrupted and can't pursue careers in professions like teachers, crown attorneys, police, and other jobs that are publicly funded because of Quebec's law. Whether things change, of course, depends on the challenges making their way through the Quebec courts, which can take years. However, the residents of Quebec who are affected by the law do have an option of moving to another part of Canada to pursue their public sector careers. Now, obviously, that's not ideal, but unlike the situation for Indian Muslims, they have an option. Indian Muslims, of course, don't have similar options due to the decades of hostility towards Muslims, which has also infected India's justice system and got a steroid boost when Narendra Modi formed the government in that country. The state-sanctioned bigotry and racism targeting Muslims in Quebec, India, and frankly, in nations like France, China, Israel, and other nations, is a direct result of anti-Muslim hostility and an explosion in Islamophobia around the world following the 9/11 attacks 20 years ago. Since that day in 2001, Muslims have been vilified, dehumanized, and denigrated in various countries. It's been the same thing has happened in news media and, of course, in entertainment media, to the point that in some jurisdictions, politicians use the vilification of Muslims as a path to electoral success. And frankly, that's what's happening in Quebec, both provincially with François Legault and federally under the Bloc Québécois. We're seeing this happen. When François Legault talked about the issue of Quebec's Bill 21 in the debate last week, he said it was the right of Quebec to do what it was doing. It was an expression of Quebec culture. Frankly, if your culture advocates racism or bigotry against any minority, then I think you need to really rethink how you express your cultural intentions. Ultimately, whether it's in India, Quebec, or China, or in France, the root problem is a pandemic of Islamophobia that is exploding around the world, where Muslims are in the minority. And if the Canadian government wants to live up to its claims that it's made so often of being a defender of human rights and the rule of law, then all party leaders should not be picking and choosing whose rights they choose to defend based on political or economic expediency. All party leaders need to step up and defend the human rights of religious minorities, not just in Quebec, but also overseas if it wants to stand up as a human rights champion and speak out and act against foreign governments that implement policies rooted in hate, bigotry, and racism that result in the persecution of minorities both within Canada and outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fareed. Much appreciated for those comments. We move on to Dr. Monia, and your question today is, over the years, the government has implemented a few mechanisms to address Canadians detained abroad, and all of our speakers have touched upon this rather sad subject today in our program. As you know, Canada has launched something called the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention in State-to-State Relations earlier this year, something that was supposed to be quite promising to help free Canadians arbitrarily detained abroad. However, the government has not yet used this declaration to properly advocate for Canadians such as Hossein Jalil, as was mentioned, or the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. So in your opinion, Dr. Monia, why haven't these measures been effective, specifically this declaration? And for something as complex as freeing Canadian prisoners detained abroad for political reasons, is there room in future foreign policy to effectively protect Canadians from arbitrary detention abroad? Please go ahead, Dr. Monia. I think you are muted. I apologize to interrupt there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I mean, I know that that this is really actually a very, very difficult question. And I'm sure Alex, who has been sitting with many other families and friends of Canadian detained abroad, knows that there is unfortunately no magical recipe, and unfortunately whatever the government has presented recently as this sort of a declaration against arbitrary detention it is a step probably in the right direction, but I don't want to be dismissive by saying that maybe it is too little and too late, because when it comes to Canadian detained abroad, and we mentioned, of course, the case of Hussein Shalil and other, I mean, there are still many other Canadian detained abroad. Of course, some of them are detained on criminal offenses, but others are on purely political reasons. And I think there must be some sort of a distinction between both, because that doesn't mean that those who are under drug or other criminal offenses do not deserve to be advocated on behalf of them, or but I think I want to make it clear here that we are talking mainly about the ones who have been arrested for political reasons. And I think Canada has really, speaking, Alex mentioned at the very end of his first intervention about the consistency. I think it's a key word here. There has been a total inconsistency by the Canadian government in dealing with Canadian detained abroad for political reasons here I'm talking about. So most of the time it depends on the goodwill, on whims of the country where the citizens are arrested. And it depends greatly on the effort by the family of the detained person to publicly pressure the Canadian government in taking strong action. So if a family have really of the person detained has good public campaign, can have mount really a good pressure, and is sophisticated enough to go and meet with politicians and give interviews and to journalists and keep the case alive in the public opinion, then there is most likely chance that there will be some action. However, if there is not such a campaign, no public really pressure, then most of the time the case will be unfortunately forgotten about. So I think this idea of leaving it up to family and not having a clear, consistent, very well thought policy, I think this is going to leave Canada and unfortunately Canadian detained abroad on their own, and Canada really not being under any sort of accountability when it comes to voters and when it comes to assessing its involvement with some cases. There were many attempts by civil society groups to create and push for the creation of a consistent policy adopted by the government in dealing with the Canadian detained abroad, but those attempts never led to one strong policy. And of course, the closest we came to is this declaration, but according to me, it's not enough. And keep relying on soft or quiet diplomacy, obviously give, in a way, a free pass to the government, because if it works, then basically the government would say, see, our effort, our quiet diplomacy worked. If it doesn't work, they will keep saying that we are working, but nothing came out of this. So I have here some few recommendations to what can we get, what can we do, what Canada can do in order to avoid this sort of very arbitrary, subjective sort of policy towards the Canadian detained abroad. First of all, I think we need to elaborate a clear, consistent foreign policy that would respect human rights, and that would walk a fine balance between respecting our standards at home, our human rights standards, social justice standard at home, while respecting the internal matters of other countries. Of course, I mean, this is really difficult. Alex mentioned that, you know, should we be more towards punishing or should we be more toward soft? I think it is the key here. It is really the key. But I think we have experts, we have people with we have diplomats with long experience. We have professors, academic, we have politicians who can sit together and do such a thing. And it has been already done, but it is a matter to adopt it and to apply it. So I think this is very important to start with. Second point, when we sell arms to some countries and help them abuse their rights of their own citizens, and then later on we ask those same country to respect the human right, I think this is totally hypocritical, and that wouldn't help us to be considered as a respected international peace broker. I think Canada showed, unfortunately, many times this sort of double standard attitude, if to not call it hypocritical attitude, and I think it won't help us to gain to obtain and to have some credibility and to obtain concrete result when it comes to negotiate the freedom of some of our Canadian detained abroad. Abusing human rights at home also when we keep quiet about police brutality exercise on marginalized group, lack of infrastructure, school, safe water in, for example, in indigenous community. These are shameful acts, and also we should have a plan to tackle those human rights abuse at home before going abroad and lecturing other countries about their human rights. This would add to our credibility. This would add to our moral values. And we have seen this a lot. China, whenever it comes to, whenever Canada raises its voice, whether it is with Falun Gong, whether it is with the Uighur, whether it is with any sort of human rights abuse in China, the first thing Chinese government are going to point to our own backyard and to the treatment of our own First Nation people. And of course, this is not a reason not to act, but I think also we have to clean our own backyard, and we have to do both. Work on human rights at home and convey a very strong, consistent, coherent policy of a human right abroad. And here there is not also a better example than what Farid talked about, Bill 21 in Quebec. When it is about Bill 21 and the discrimination, clearly a piece of legislation that discriminates by banning women wearing hijab or other person wearing any religious sign to work in some profession. And then when we talk about how women are dressing in Afghanistan and how women are not able to drive for a long time in Saudi Arabia, but meanwhile we have these policies that some of our provincial governments implement, but still we do not have enough political courage to raise it and criticize it and actually challenge it in the court. The big kind of elephant in the room is, of course, remain the Palestine issue. It is an important topic that affects many Muslim communities. We spoke about the Canadian community who vote for the Liberal, that we don't want to really like some sort of ruffle any feather with them, and the government would like to keep their voters happy. We have other voters from many Muslim communities across Canada who also care about the Palestine issue and think that there is an unjust treatment to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, in the occupied territories. However, these issues are barely mentioned, if not mentioned during the campaign, despite the fact that each time that there are wars and violent attack, for example, on Gaza, that we see thousands of Canadians coming out in the street to voice their disagreement, their anger with those attacks, and demand Canada to put pressure on Israel and respect the international laws. So I think those are some sort of main points or main avenues that I think Canada should build some sort of a consistent, coherent foreign policy. For years since the government of Trudeau, we heard about the creation of a feminist sort of foreign policies, but we didn't really see it put into application. And of course, to bring back this element of hypocrisy, feminist for other countries, but not feminist enough in our own country. So I think we should be careful. We should keep those guidelines of justice, whether we ask it here in Canada for our communities, and whether we can ask them abroad. We have to keep doing it clearly and not by picking and choosing our causes. I think this is where I'm going to stop, and I will be looking forward to answer some of the questions.
Thank you. So first of all, I really appreciate your time to touch upon a wide-ranging issues that are on the minds of a lot of viewers also today, specifically Palestine. So thank you so much for bringing that up. For the sake of brevity and just to be able to close the program on time, what I'll do is I'll present a few user submitted questions in the same order that we've been through already. So first beginning with Alex, and then Fareed, and then moving on to Dr. Monia. And feel free to tie in any concluding statements so that at the very end, I can conclude on my end. So first of all, I'll begin with Alex, and a really interesting question that has been submitted here. I'm just going to read it out verbatim. So Indigenous lives in Canada have been quite mismanaged by the Canadian government. What is the thought process of federal leaders when it comes to advocating for these minorities abroad, meaning the people that we're talking about, especially when the same human rights passion isn't properly exercised for Indigenous peoples in Canada? And a few examples were given. So for example, child and family policy separation, missing and murdered Indigenous women, so on and so forth. Please go ahead, Alex, and 2 minutes per speaker, if that's all right.
My 2 minutes.
Sorry about that.
I think it's a profoundly important question, and I think it really puts into focus something that I think all of us have touched on in a variety of different ways, which is this connection between domestic and global, national and international. So obviously, the devastating, long-standing and entrenched crisis that we face in Canada when it comes to the rights of Indigenous peoples is probably Canada's greatest disgrace. And despite all sorts of fine words, including many fine words from the current government and some initiatives, including the embrace of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we're still so far from where we need to be in terms of meaningful reconciliation and truly advancing respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples. And I think it is important to recognize that first and foremost, that needs to be of real concern to us because that's a glaring domestic human rights concern. And it goes back in not just years, of course, but decades and decades. But it does undermine Canada's standing on the world stage. It does leave us very legitimately vulnerable to critique from other countries who say, Well, that's fine and dandy that you're saying we should do X, Y, and Z with respect to our Indigenous peoples here or to minority groups or other human rights concerns. But look at all of the ways in which you fail abysmally, including failing to take up a whole raft of recommendations that UN human rights bodies have made to Canada with respect to the rights of Indigenous peoples. So I think it very powerfully frames that interconnection between the two. And as my concluding remark, I will simply say thank you so much for this opportunity. I think we've all passionately shared our view that foreign policy matters. We've also recognized that, far too often it doesn't figure where it needs to. And I guess my exhortation to everyone would be every chance you get, every candidate who knocks on your door, every community forum you go to, put this on the agenda, ask the question and make it clear that this does matter. Thank you.
Very well put, Alex. Moving on to Fareed. The question here, I'm just going to once again read it verbatim for you. So the biggest topic in the elections was in fact human rights, foreign policy, and Canada/China relationship, despite the fact that the current government won't even acknowledge the Uighur Muslim genocide. How can we put our trust in a party to fix an issue that they won't even acknowledge that there's a crisis there? 2 minutes, Fareed, as well as your concluding statements. Thank you so much.
Yes, well, it is tough to take a government seriously on human rights when one of the greatest human rights atrocities that's happening in the world today is the situation of the Uyghurs in China. The resolution that was passed in the House of Commons was passed by a majority, but not a single member of the cabinet nor the prime minister voted in support of it. And once again, the reason for that, sadly, is politics and economics. The government doesn't want to aggravate China any more than it is doing with respect to the situation with the two Michaels. But the reality is you can't be a government, whether the government is liberal or conservative, going around the world, thumping your chest, talking about we're defenders of human rights, we're defenders of the rule of law, when in practice you're not doing that. Canada was one of the architects of the Genocide Convention after World War II, and it was a Canadian who co-authored the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And yet Canada is not living up to its signature on those treaties, and frankly, hasn't on many occasions since World War II. With respect to the Uyghurs, of course, we've seen the actions of the government, but also we've seen the actions, or I would say lack of action, by the government with respect to the Rohingya. The parliament passed a unanimously supported motion declaring the Rohingya genocide, and the Rohingya Human Rights Network and Rohingya activists have been pressuring the government to act on that. The government has made promises about supporting the case against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice, but has not done anything in that regard. And of course, there's the perennial issue of Palestine, where basically the government talks out of both sides of its mouth, talking about human rights and supporting a two-state solution, meanwhile doing nothing concrete to actually help the situation along on the ground. We have to hold our governments accountable, and we have to, as Alex said, put it to candidates and party leaders wherever we can to say, take action. We're not going to have you issue political platitudes and then take no action in regards to the important human rights issues of the day. I think that as Canadians, as voters, when we are looking at who to support in this election, we have to look at the records of the past governments, both conservative and liberal, and to see whether they live up to the rhetoric that the two parties have put out. There's a statement that is attributed to Albert Einstein, and it says that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same results or expecting different results. Well, for 154 years, we've done the same thing over and over again when it comes to elections, where we've had liberal and conservative. And I think Canadians have to get out of the mentality of saying there's only two parties available who are suitable to govern this country and start looking at the three major options that are available. We're going to be voting next week, or if you haven't voted already, make sure you do get out and vote and take the issue of human rights to heart, because if we can't support human rights, live up to our human rights obligations, then we can't call ourselves the true democracy and freedom-loving country that we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our viewers that have submitted really quite a range of incredible questions that I really wish that I could spend the next couple of hours talking to our expert panelists on and getting their professional opinion. But for now, we're going to conclude with the last question here directed to Dr. Monia. So Dr. Monia, during the recent elections debates yesterday, federal leaders disagreed on how to properly conduct diplomacy in a way that's effective. So I'm just reading this out here. So for example, Trudeau commented that diplomacy must be done strategically with partners, whereas O'Toole and Singh from the NDP talked about a more aggressive approach. And I just want to jump in here and remind everybody about the comment that Trudeau made about not throwing tomatoes across the pond or something similar to that. So in other words, when it comes to human rights that's caught between bilateral or multilateral relations, what do you think is the right approach? And 2 minutes, please.
Yes, of course. I mean, yes, it is easy to say whatever Jagmeet Singh or Aaron O'Toole, they are not in the situation of Justin Trudeau, and they can, and I think they should, frankly, it is their role because they are on the opposition. They are not, I mean, yes, they are running to become prime minister, but they are still not in that position yet. So I think it is good to put pressure on the prime minister, but I think it is a little bit also idealistic to think that once they are going to be themselves prime minister, if they win this election, my own opinion is that I don't think that they will do anything different than what Trudeau is doing right now. So it's not I'm defending Trudeau. I think what he has done, he put himself and his government put themselves in a big trouble when they arrested Meng Wanzhou, and I think that should have been the main question that was asked. Now it is a big mess that Trudeau found himself in, and of course it is difficult. And I think yes, the reaction should be strategic, should be very much studied, should be firm, but should not also put many other Canadian interests at risk, as we have seen. You know, a Canadian action here put the lives of Canadian so those matters are difficult. They are politically very sensitive, and there is not one single answer. However, I mean, and to give you here another example, Hussein Shalil has been in prison under the Stephen government, so it is a conservative government, and under later on Justin Trudeau government, and unfortunately he's still in prison. So the fact that we switched from a conservative government to a liberal government, it didn't have really any impact on his freedom and his release from China. So I think this is we should put this into perspective. It's not a matter as much. I don't think there is no relationship at all to the policy of a particular party and views toward China or toward other countries, but I think also there is some sort of a continuation into Canada has been, I think, across party lines, has been continuing this sort of the soft diplomacy with some moments of awakening. So I think how can we create a continual awakening instead of having just quiet and diplomacy? I think this is the key. The other also, my concluding remark here will be some sort of a reflection about Islamophobia in general, and we spoke about it here a few times during our respectively all our intervention. And I think there is the domestic also part of Islamophobia, but there is also the international part of it. I mean, there are countries. We mentioned the case of India, we mentioned the case of China, and there are many, I mean, France as well, I mean, many other countries who produce and export Islamophobia. And I think we have to be careful here as Canadian citizens when we are voting for whether, you know, one party or another, to keep in mind this interrelationship between what the government and what each party is doing at home and what they are doing abroad. So I think for many years, for 2 decades, we have been here in Canada producing Islamophobia with anti-terrorism legislation. And so now we have a government, you know, the Liberals saying we have a summit to deal with Islamophobia. It's a little bit here contradictory, inconsistent. So I think we have to really ask each party what they have been done to tackle Islamophobia inside. So whether to denounce it, to stop it, to not produce it, to not encourage it, but also what kind of policy they do in order to distance themselves from the other exporter and producer country of Islamophobia. So I think, I mean, this is maybe one angle. Of course, there are many other angles when it comes to voting, but for Muslims in particular, I think those are very important issues that they should keep in mind and reflect upon them and think about them before casting their ballot. Thank you very much for giving us all this opportunity, and for me in particular, this panel to share with your audience some of our reflection and some of our opinion on these important matters.
On the contrary, thank you and everyone here on the panel. I just wanted to say quickly that Justice for All Canada is a nonprofit human rights, anti-genocide advocacy organization. We are quite grassroots, and therefore to obtain such a stellar lineup of human rights experts to share their time with us this morning and this afternoon, it's quite incredible for us, and we're still quite happy and kind of on the moon about having everybody here on the panel. So I wanted to thank everybody for your time, and it means a lot to our small team. And for everybody watching, we've had so many questions submitted, and I just touched upon a few just for time sensitive, for our time sensitive program. However, you can keep the comments and questions rolling in by just sending us an email at info@justiceforallcanada.org. I also wanted to direct everybody's attention to the chat box. I've shared a recent report card breakdown of the top human rights issues that actually we've been discussing here, and how federal leaders as well as federal parties have dedicated their platforms to these foreign policy issues. You can also check out our op-ed that was recently published by our executive director in the Hill Times, and there's a URL to that article. And lastly, just to stay updated on similar events in the future that we hopefully will plan to organize, do subscribe to our newsletter. And I do see that one of our panelists, Mr. Farid Khan, has shared an article that he has written on the issue of 9/11. What a perfect opportunity as today, September the 12th. Please do check out that article of his. That's also in the chat box. And once again, to our expert panelists, thank you once again for your valuable comments and your valuable presence today. And I do look forward to working with you once again very soon. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Take care, Mr.
Thank
Farid.
you.
Take care, Dr. Monia. Bye. Take care. Wa alaikum salam.